16 Most Insane Moments on Johnny Carson. Number 8 will shock you. For 30 years, Johnny Carson invited America into their living rooms 5 nights a week. As host of The Tonight Show, he presented a carefully crafted image of cool professionalism, the unflappable king of late night, who could handle any situation with his trademark wit and charm. But sometimes even Johnny Carson, television's most controlled performer, found himself completely blindsided by the unpredictable chaos that can happen when the cameras are rolling live. Johnny prided himself on being prepared for anything, revealed a former Tonight Show producer who worked with Carson for over a decade. But there were moments when even he couldn't maintain that famous Carson composure, when he'd completely lose it on national television. Tonight, we're counting down the 16 most insane, unscripted, and unforgettable moments from Carson's 30-year reign. The times when television's most controlled host found himself completely at the mercy of his guests, his emotions, or sometimes just bizarre circumstances that no one could have predicted. And the moment at number 8 generated more viewer mail than almost any other in the show's history, shocking some viewers while delighting others with Carson's unexpected candor. But first, let's look at the tomahawk demonstration that produced perhaps the most legendary laughing fit in television history. A moment so perfect in its timing and visual impact that it couldn't have been scripted if they tried. But that's indefinite. All right. Music, applause, 1. Ed Ames' tomahawk disaster. It began as a straightforward demonstration. Ed Ames, then starring as Mingo on the popular NBC series Daniel Boone, appeared on The Tonight Show in April 1965 to demonstrate the art of tomahawk throwing, a skill his character regularly displayed on the frontier drama. The segment started normally enough. Ames explained the proper technique, while Carson listened attentively. A wooden silhouette representing a cowboy was brought out as a target, and Ames prepared to throw. What happened next created television history. Ames threw the tomahawk with precision, but it landed squarely in the wooden figure's crotch. The studio audience erupted into immediate laughter, but it was Carson's reaction that transformed a funny mishap into one of television's most iconic moments. Johnny just lost it completely, recalled a director who was in the control room that night. We'd seen him laugh before, but never like this. He was literally doubled over, tears streaming down his face, completely unable to speak for what felt like minutes. Carson's laughing fit lasted nearly 3 minutes, an eternity in television time. When he finally caught his breath enough to speak, he delivered a perfectly timed quip. But, that's indefinite. All right, right? Applause. I didn't even know you were Jewish. The line sent the audience into fresh hysterics and showcased Carson's remarkable ability to find the perfect punchline, even in completely unplanned moments. What made this incident particularly special was how it revealed Carson's genuine, unfiltered reaction. The professional mask dropped completely as he surrendered to uncontrollable laughter. That moment showed why Johnny was so beloved, explained a former NBC executive. In an era of carefully managed celebrity images, viewers got to see Johnny completely lose his composure. It was authentic in a way that television rarely is. The tomahawk incident became so legendary that it was replayed countless times over the years, including during Carson's final week on the air in 1992, a testament to its status as perhaps the most spontaneously perfect moment in the show's history. Carson's cigarette box. Oh, I broke Carson's cigarette box. 2. Don Rickles breaks Carson's cigarette box. Johnny Carson was known for being meticulous about his set. Every item on his desk had its place, including a wooden cigarette box that was something of a personal treasure to the host. So, when Don Rickles guest hosted The Tonight Show in October 1973 and accidentally broke that cigarette box, he knew he was in trouble. The next night, when Carson returned, he mentioned the broken box on air, showing the audience the damage and promising retribution against Rickles. But no one, including Rickles himself, could have predicted what form that retribution would take. A few months later, Carson learned that Rickles was filming his sitcom CPO Sharkey on a nearby NBC soundstage. In an unprecedented move, Carson decided to interrupt the live taping with cameras in tow to confront Rickles about the cigarette box. That was completely unplanned, revealed a Tonight Show producer who was present. Johnny just looked at us during commercial break and said, "Isn't Rickles taping today? Let's go over there." The crew grabbed what equipment they could and literally ran across the studio lot. What followed was one of the most spontaneous and hilarious moments in Carson's tenure. He burst onto Rickles set during actual taping with the CPO Sharky audience, completely confused about what was happening. Rickles, caught mid-scene in his Navy uniform, looked genuinely shocked as Carson stormed in. They told me you broke it on the show last night." "Well, you can't know, but I'm sorry about the box. I will come up with something." "Well, I hope so, but just keep me on your show. You mean so much to me. Can I know, please?" No, don't humble yourself. Please, I want to be with you. So, don't humble yourself. I was in the middle of the scene," Rickles protested, to which Carson replied, "I don't care about your scene. You broke my cigarette box." What made the moment special wasn't just a surprise interruption, but how it showcased a genuine friendship between the two men. Despite Carson's mock anger, his affection for Rickles was obvious, as was Rickles' delight at being ambushed by the normally reserved host. Johnny wouldn't have done that with just anyone, noted a director who worked with both men. It showed how much he actually loved Rickles and how comfortable they were together. Johnny was always in control of his show, but with Dawn, he was willing to be the butt of the joke. The incident became an immediate television classic, replayed countless times over the years, and remembered as one of the rare instances when Carson completely broke format and let spontaneity rule the day. "Here's B. Midler. Anytime you need." Well, when I asked him to come out, and I can't believe the last guest, the last fool Mr. Carson will have. To suffer gladly. You are the wind beneath my three. Betty Midler makes Carson cry. As Johnny Carson's 30-year run on The Tonight Show approached its end in May 1992, the final episodes became increasingly emotional. The penultimate show featuring Robin Williams and B. Midler was expected to be entertaining, but no one anticipated the powerful moment that would become one of Carson's most memorable farewells. Near the end of the episode, Midler, who had joked and bantered with Carson throughout her segment, suddenly shifted the mood by announcing she wanted to sing something special for the departing host. She began a tender rendition of One for My Baby and One More for the Road, the Harold Arlen and Johnny Mercer standard about last calls and goodbyes. As Midler sang directly to him, the camera caught something remarkable. Johnny Carson, television's most controlled personality, with tears welling in his eyes. You could have heard a pin drop in the studio, recalled a sound engineer who was working that night. Everyone, the crew, the audience, we all knew we were witnessing something extraordinarily intimate. Johnny wasn't just allowing himself to be vulnerable on camera. He was saying goodbye to 30 years of his life. For a man known for his emotional restraint, this public display was unprecedented. Throughout his career, Carson had carefully maintained a certain distance, charming, but never completely revealing his true feelings. In this moment, however, the wall came down completely. Johnny didn't try to hide it or make a joke to break the tension. Noted a director who worked on the final shows. He let himself have that human moment with Bet and the audience. It was incredibly moving precisely because we all knew how rare it was for him to show that side of himself. When Midler finished, Carson leaned forward and kissed her hand, a gesture of genuine gratitude that spoke volumes. He then looked into the camera and simply said, "I can't top that." The moment has since been described as one of the most authentic in television history. A rare instance where the normally guarded Carson allowed viewers to see his genuine emotions during what was clearly an overwhelming personal transition. See, he's just getting comfortable. Well, I can't sit here. I can't sit and talk to people with an animal on my head. Applause, cute little. Was he spitting? Was that saliva? 4. Animal handler's monkey climbs Carson's head. Throughout his tenure on The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson welcomed countless animal experts with their exotic companions. These segments were always unpredictable, but perhaps none more so than a 1979 appearance by animal handler Joanne Steele and her Capucin monkey. The segment began routinely enough with Steele explaining the monkey's habits, while Carson listened attentively. Then, without warning, the monkey decided Carson's perfectly coiffed hair looked like an interesting playground. The monkey just launched itself right onto Johnny's head. Recalled a camera operator who was working that night. There was no warning, no build-up. 1 second it was sitting quietly. The next it was using Johnny's famous hair as a jungle gym. What made the moment legendary wasn't just the monkey key's antics, but Carson's reaction. Rather than panicking or calling for assistance, he remained perfectly still, a look of resigned amusement on his face, as the primate thoroughly disheveled his carefully styled hair. Johnny's hair was sacred. It was always perfect, not a strand out of place, explained a makeup artist who worked on the show. To see it completely destroyed by a monkey while he just sat there with that deadpan expression, it was comedy gold. When the monkey finally returned to its handler, Carson looked directly into the camera, his hair sticking up in all directions, and delivered a perfectly timed, "And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why I prefer cats." The audience erupted in laughter. What made this moment particularly special was how it showcased Carson's greatest strength as a host, his ability to find humor in completely unplanned disasters without ever seeming flustered or losing his cool. That was Johnny at his best, noted producer who worked on the show for many years. He knew the audience wasn't laughing at him. They were laughing with him at the absurdity of the situation. He always understood the difference, and he never minded being part of the joke as long as it was funny. The monkey incident became one of the most requested clips from the show's archives, a perfect example of Carson's unique ability to maintain his dignified persona even in the most undignified circumstances. Particular interest of mine, and I'm very paid to present this gentleman's amazing illusions. Would you welcome the great Flying E5 Steve Martin's absurdist magic routine? When Steve Martin appeared on The Tonight Show in 1980, he was already establishing himself as a pioneer of a new kind of anti-comedy, humor that derived its power from being deliberately awkward, absurd, and sometimes completely nonsensical. For this particular appearance, Martin announced he would perform a magic act, prompting Carson to step aside and give him the stage. What followed was one of the strangest and most hilarious performances ever seen on The Tonight Show. Martin's Great Fly Danny routine featured the comedian pretending to unzip his pants and pull various objects from his fly: eggs, a salt shaker, a ringing telephone, and eventually a tiny hand that waved the audience. The beauty of that moment was watching Johnny's reaction, recalled a writer who worked on the show. He started out playing the straight man, but as the routine got more and more absurd, you could see him genuinely losing it, not just performing laughter, but actually being caught off guard by Martin's commitment to the bit. By the end of the routine, Carson was doubled over, struggling to maintain his composure as Martin continued with complete deadpan seriousness. What made the moment special was a visible delight Carson took in being surprised by Martin's bizarre creativity. Johnny loved being genuinely entertained, explained a producer who worked with both men. He saw thousands of comedians over the years, and very few could truly surprise him. Steve was one of the rare performers who could make Johnny feel like a regular audience member again, someone who didn't know what was coming next. Applause. The routine has since been recognized as a perfect encapsulation of Martin's revolutionary approach to comedy, subverting expectations, embracing absurdity, and finding humor in the deliberately uncomfortable. For Carson, it represented a rare opportunity to step out of his host role and simply enjoy being caught up in another performer's unique vision. After the camera stopped, Johnny was still laughing. The producer remembered. He turned to me and said, "That's the kind of thing that makes this job worth doing." High praise from a man who had seen it all. Believe that comedy can heal you. Praise the power. Praise the Jesus. And Sears had a sale as furniture went cheap. 6. Robin Williams goes rogue. When Robin Williams appeared on Tonight Show, the normally structured format of late-night television gave way to pure uncontrolled chaos. Williams, with his manic energy and lightning fast improvisational skills, simply couldn't be contained within Carson's usual interview framework. Johnny once said Robin was like trying to catch lightning in a bottle while it's already running away, recalled a Tonight Show writer who witnessed several of Williams' appearances. Most guests followed Johnny's lead. Robin was one of the few who actually forced Johnny to follow his. A particularly memorable appearance occurred in the early 1980s, when Williams was ostensibly there to promote a film. Within seconds of sitting down, however, he had launched into a series of rapid-fire impressions, leapt from the guest chair to demonstrate a physical bit, and transformed Carson's desk into an impromptu stage for what appeared to be a completely unplanned performance. The producers would be in the control room in a panic, revealed a director who worked on several of Williams' appearances. They'd be saying, "Where is he going with this? Should we cut to commercial?" But Johnny would just wave them off. He recognized that with Robin, you just had to let go and enjoy the ride. And yet, look, thou fool, come to Heather. No, thou hast forced me to wear designer jeans for no reason. Applause. I will walk now, and cameraman going, "Where's he going now? Where am I now?" What made these appearances special was watching Carson, normally the one in control, willingly surrender the reins to Williams' frenetic genius. Rather than trying to steer the conversation back to prepared talking points, Carson would simply lean back in his chair, sometimes wiping away tears of laughter, content to serve as an audience member rather than a host. Johnny loved that Robin kept him on his toes, explained the producer. After thousands of interviews that followed predictable patterns, Robin was gloriously unpredictable. Johnny once told me, "I never know what's going to happen when Robin sits down." And that's the highest compliment I can give a guest. Williams' appearances became so legendary that Carson would actually prepare the audience before he came out, essentially warning them to expect the unexpected. It was one of the rare instances where Carson acknowledged that his usual format might not apply, a testament to his recognition of Williams' singular talent. Marco Manganzo was hurt. Marco Mangalanzo. Fambino Balmato. 2 bullets in the head. Thursday. 7. Don Rickles roasts Frank Sinatra. When Frank Sinatra appeared on Tonight Show in 1976, he arrived with the aura of untouchable celebrity that had made him a legend and that had made many comedians wary of targeting him with their humor. Sinatra's connections and temperament were well known in Hollywood, and few performers were willing to risk his displeasure. Don Rickles was not among those few. With Sinatra seated next to him on Carson's couch, Rickles launched into one of his trademark roasts, treating the chairman of the board with the same irreverent disrespect he might show to any audience member at his nightclub act. "Look at him. He's the big star," Rickles began, gesturing toward Sinatra. "He comes on, and everybody thinks he's so wonderful. Let me tell you something. This man is overrated." As Rickles continued his barrage, the camera caught Carson's reaction, a mixture of nervous laughter and genuine concern about how Sinatra might respond to this public ribbing. Johnny was actually nervous, confirmed the producer who was present that night. Carson had seen Sinatra's temper firsthand over the years and knew he didn't always take kindly to being the butt of jokes. There was real tension in the studio. Would Sinatra laugh it off, or would he get angry? The moment reached its peak when Rickles, in typical fashion, grabbed Sinatra's knee and said, "Frank, believe me, I'm only kidding. You know I love you. Can I get a ride home?" To everyone's relief, Sinatra burst into genuine laughter, clearly appreciating Rickles' willingness to treat him like any other target rather than handling him with kid gloves because of his status. "That took guts," Carson later admitted to his producer. Don knew exactly how far he could push, but there was still real risk there. Not many people talked to Sinatra that way and lived to tell about it. What made the moment special wasn't just the comedy, but the cultural significance. It represented a rare instance where Sinatra, notorious for controlling his public image, allowed himself to be publicly roasted without repercussions. For Carson, who prided himself on creating a show where anything could happen, it was a perfect demonstration of the unpredictable magic that live television could produce when strong personalities collided in unexpected ways. Have you always been rather zick? What would they call that? Well, you grew up in Tennessee and I think healthy. Healthy, I guess. Bosomy. Bozy. Yeah, I guess that'd be what they'd say. But 8, Dolly Parton and the infamous comment. When Dolly Parton appeared on The Tonight Show in 1977, she was already famous for both her musical talent and her voluptuous figure, the latter often the subject of jokes that Parton herself frequently made with good humor. During their interview, Carson and Parton, engaged in the kind of playful banter that was a hallmark of The Tonight Show. As the conversation continued, however, Carson made a comment that would become one of the most talked about moments in the show's history. Looking at Parton's low-cut outfit, Carson remarked, "I'd give a year of my life to peek under that blouse." The studio audience erupted in a mixture of gasps and laughter. Parton, ever the professional, laughed it off with characteristic grace, but the moment had already been captured on live television. "You could feel the control room holding its breath," recalled a director who was working that night. In that era, that kind of comment was still considered acceptable by many. But even so, it was unusually direct for Johnny, who typically maintained a more gentlemanly persona on air. The comment generated more viewer mail than almost any other moment in the show's history. Some found it refreshingly honest, appreciating Carson's willingness to say what many might have been thinking. Others criticized it as inappropriate and disrespectful. Regardless of Parton's good-natured response, Johnny never publicly addressed the controversy, noted a former NBC executive, but privately he acknowledged that he'd crossed a line. The interesting thing was that Dolly herself never expressed any offense. In fact, she later said she took it as a compliment. What made this moment particularly significant was how it revealed the changing standards of television and public discourse. What might have passed without comment in earlier decades was now becoming subject to greater scrutiny, a cultural shift that would accelerate in the years that followed. For Carson, who had built his career on knowing exactly where the line was at any given moment, it represented a rare misstep, a case where his usually impeccable judgment about what was appropriate for television temporarily failed him. That comment wouldn't make it to air today, observed a television historian. But it captures a moment in time when television was still figuring out the boundaries between candor and respect, between what might be said in private and what was appropriate for broadcast. The incident remains one of the most frequently cited moments from Carson's 30-year tenure, a testament to its impact on viewers and its place in the cultural conversation about celebrity, gender, and the evolving standards of public discourse. Let me ask you something. What was the guy's name in Vegas? HUGA? Yeah, he's got a better job than you. He only works 2 hours a week. 9. Bob Hope bombs. And Carson is over it. Bob Hope was one of America's most beloved entertainers. A comedy legend whose career spanned vaudeville radio, film, and television. His appearances on The Tonight Show should have been highlight moments. And in earlier years, they often were. By the 1980s, however, a troubling pattern had emerged. Hope, then in his late 70s and early 80s, would arrive with dated material, often reading jokes from cards and seeming disconnected from the audience's reaction. Johnny dreaded those appearances, revealed a writer who worked on the show during this period. Earlier in his career, Bob had been brilliant, but by this point, he was essentially going through the motions, telling the same jokes about golf and politics that he'd been recycling for years. What made these segments particularly uncomfortable was watching Carson, himself a master of comedy timing, forced to pretend that Hope's material was landing better than it actually was. Johnny was too professional to ever let on publicly. The writer continued. But backstage, after one particularly painful appearance, he muttered, "Hope doesn't listen, he just talks." It was a rare moment of candor about a fellow comedian he respected, but whose act had calcified over time. The most awkward of these appearances occurred in the mid-1980s when Hope arrived with a set of jokes about then current events that felt stale and disconnected. As Hope continued reading from his cards, seemingly oblivious to the tepid audience response, Carson's face told a real story, a mixture of professional courtesy and genuine discomfort. They do a number called The Lion's Man Lament, and it sounds pretty good considering they're singing through scar tissue. I think it's marvelous. Johnny's smile got tighter and tighter. Recalled a camera operator who was present that night. He was doing that thing where he'd loosen his tie and glance at Ed, his signal that things weren't going well, but he was going to soldier through. What made these moments particularly poignant was a contrast between Hope's earlier brilliance and his later appearances. Carson, who deeply respected comedy's traditions and its pioneering figures, found himself in the uncomfortable position of witnessing a legend who had outlasted his ability to connect with an audience. It was like watching Willie Mays in his final season. Observe a producer who worked on several of Hope's later appearances. Johnny understood better than anyone that comedy is ephemeral. What works in one era doesn't necessarily translate to the next. I think watching Hope struggle reminded him of his own mortality in the business. Despite his private frustrations, Carson always treated Hope with public respect, a testament to his understanding of show business history and his own place within it. And there are nights when I think I feel that stare, and I reach out my hand to stroke his hair, and he's not there. 10. Jimmy Stewart's poem leaves Carson speechless. Jimmy Stewart was a frequent and beloved guest on The Tonight Show throughout Carson's tenure. Their rapport was always warm, with Stewart's gentle, sometimes halting delivery, providing a perfect counterpoint to Carson's smooth professionalism. In 1981, Stewart appeared on the show and mentioned that he had written a poem about his dog, Bo, who had recently passed away. Carson invited him to read it, likely expecting a light-hearted tribute to a beloved pet. What followed instead was one of the most genuinely moving moments in the show's history. Stewart began reading Bow, a poem that started simply enough, but gradually revealed deeper emotions about love, loyalty, and loss. And there are nights when I think I feel that stare, and I reach out my hand to stroke his hair, but he's not there. Oh, how I wish that wasn't so. I'll always love a dog named Bo. As Stewart finished reading, the camera caught Carson's reaction, genuine emotion on the face of television's most controlled personality. Carson, visibly moved, seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Johnny was actually tearing up, confirmed a director who was in the control room that night. This wasn't TV emotion for the audience. This was Johnny Carson, the man, not the host, genuinely touched by Stewart's words and delivery. What made the moment especially powerful was its unexpectedness. In an entertainment format built around promotional chatter and light humor, Stewart had delivered something authentically poignant, and Carson had allowed himself to respond with equally authentic emotion. Johnny didn't try to cover a joke or move quickly to a commercial. Noted producer who witnessed the exchange. He gave the moment the respect it deserved, which told the audience it was okay to feel something, too. That was rare in late-night television, which typically value cleverness over genuine emotion. The segment has since become one of the most remembered from Carson's entire 30-year run, not for its humor or celebrity gossip, but for its simple human truth about love and loss, delivered by one American icon and received with visible emotion by another. This is a right. It's a heavy snake. What does it weigh? About 50, 60 pounds. She weighs 11. Snake escapes during Joan Embry segment. Joan Embry of the San Diego Zoo was a regular Tonight Show guest, bringing a variety of exotic animals for Carson to interact with, sometimes enthusiastically, sometimes reluctantly. While these segments always carried an element of unpredictability, one appearance in the late 1970s provided a moment of genuine, spontaneous comedy that has become part of Carson lore. Something as large as a small pig or wildcat, usually not humans. Yeah, well, I thank you for bringing it down. Waiting my car. We'll be right back. Embry had brought several animals that day, including a particularly large Burmese python. As she was explaining facts about the snake, it began to move more actively than expected, suddenly slithering off the desk and heading in Carson's direction. Carson's reaction was immediate and unfiltered. He leapt from his chair with remarkable speed, backing away from the approaching reptile with a look of genuine alarm that sent the audience into hysterics. Johnny was not faking that response, laughed the floor director who witnessed the incident. He had a well-known discomfort with some more intimidating animals, though he was always game to try. But when that snake made its move, all pretense disappeared. That was pure fight-or-flight response on national television. Once the snake was safely recaptured by Embry and her assistants, Carson returned to his chair, straightened his tie, and delivered the perfect punchline. Somebody better check my pants. What made the moment especially endearing was how it momentarily stripped away Carson's suave persona, revealing the same instinctive reaction that many viewers would have had in the same situation. Johnny's greatest gift was his relatability, explained a producer who worked on many of Embry's appearances. In that moment, he wasn't the king of late night. He was just a guy who really didn't want a giant snake crawling up his leg. The audience loved those glimpses of the real Johnny beneath the polished host. The python incident became one of the most requested clips from the show's animal segments. A perfect example of how Carson's willingness to place himself in potentially uncomfortable situations often resulted in the show's most memorable moments. I was a little bit late tonight. Sorry if you know I upset anybody here. I had an unusual incident in traffic. I either ran over a sheep or I ran over a small man wearing a sheepskin coat. 12. George Carlin sneaks in censorship jab. George Carlin had built much of his later career around challenging societal norms and pushing the boundaries of what could be said on television, most famously with his 7 words you can never say on television routine. His appearances on The Tonight Show required a delicate balance, allowing Carlin to be himself while respecting the network's content restrictions. During a 1983 appearance, Carlin delivered a seemingly innocent monologue about everyday observations. Embedded within it, however, was a subtle but unmistakable jab at network censorship, a clever wordplay that seemed to slip past NBC's standard department, but was immediately caught by the more alert members of the audience and by Carson himself. Let me ask you a question. If a real stupid person becomes senile, how do you know? Johnny definitely got what George was doing, confirmed a writer who worked on the show at the time. You could see in his reaction, that knowing smile and the quick glance toward the camera. He was essentially saying to the audience, yes, I caught that too, and I'm going to let it slide. What made the moment special was Carson's silent complicity. Rather than steering the conversation in another direction or creating distance between himself and Carlin's subversive humor, Carson's reaction suggested a personal appreciation for Carlin's cleverness in navigating the restrictions. Johnny had his own issues with network interference over the years, explained a producer who worked closely with Carson. While he wasn't a boundary pusher like Carlin, he respected comedians who found creative ways to say what they wanted to say despite the limitations placed on them. The network executives were reportedly less amused. According to staff members, NBC received several complaints about the segment, questioning how such content had made it to air. Johnny defended Carlin in private. The producer continued. He essentially told the network that if they couldn't figure out what Carlin had done until after it aired, then the comedian had earned the right to get away with it. Johnny appreciated cleverness above almost everything else. For viewers, the moment represented a rare instance of television commenting on its own restrictions, a meta moment where Carson, Carlin, and the more perceptive audience members shared a joke that existed partly because of the very censorship it was critiquing. You're going to start already. No, I'm not starting. I'm almost through. Good to see you. How do all these people get in your room? 13. Dean Martin appears drunk and kills. Dean Martin had built his public persona around the image of the charming, slightly inebriated performer who could deliver perfectly timed jokes while appearing to be halfway to intoxicated. This carefully crafted character made him one of the most beloved entertainers of his era and a frequent guest on The Tonight Show. During a memorable appearance in the 1970s, Martin seemed to lean particularly hard into his tipsy persona, slurring words, missing his chair when trying to sit down, and delivering punchlines with the exaggerated precision of someone working hard to appear sober. Dean was playing it up more than usual that night, recalled a director who worked on the show. The audience was eating it up. They loved the idea that they were seeing the real Dean Martin, the life of the party, who had maybe had a few too many before coming on air. What made the appearance particularly interesting was Carson's response. Rather than trying to rein Martin in or steer the conversation towards safer territory, Carson effectively became Martin's straight man, setting up situations that allowed the seemingly intoxicated performer to deliver increasingly outrageous responses. Johnny knew exactly what Dean was doing, explained to a producer who worked with both men. Dean's drunk act was just that, an act, or at least a greatly exaggerated version of reality. But Johnny understood that audiences love that persona. So he gave Dean the space to play it to the hilt. What? You don't do many shows other than your own television show. I don't see you running. I go to the Megam. Go to what? The Megam in Las Vegas and the MGM Hotel. The segment reached its comedic peak when Martin attempted to tell a story about a golf game, lost his train of thought mid-anecdote, looked confused for a moment, then simply shrugged and said, "Ah, who cares?" It wasn't that funny anyway. The audience erupted in laughter at this apparent moment of drunken candor. The brilliance of Dean was that you were never quite sure how much was an act and how much was real, noted the producer. Johnny appreciated that ambiguity. It created an electricity in the studio, because viewers felt like anything might happen. While some critics questioned the wisdom of appearing to celebrate excessive drinking on national television, the segment remains a classic example of two entertainment legends playing off each other's strengths. Martin's carefully crafted persona, finding its perfect complement in Carson's willingness to play along. John Donne, are you the governor of Guam? Aren't you getting me now? I know your age. The prom's over. Oh. 14. Johnny crashes his own monologue. One of the most predictable elements of The Tonight Show was its format. Carson's nightly monologue was a television institution delivered with clockwork regularity for 3 decades. This predictability made it all the more surprising when, during one memorable broadcast in the early 1980s, the monologue was interrupted in spectacular fashion. Carson had just begun his nightly jokes when Don Rickles, scheduled to appear later in the show, began heckling him loudly from backstage. The audience, initially confused, soon realized what was happening as Rickles' distinctive voice became clearly audible. Carson, momentarily thrown off his rhythm, paused mid-joke. Then, instead of trying to continue, he did something completely unexpected. He broke character entirely, turned toward the curtain and called out, "Dawn, get out here." That was not planned at all, confirmed the stage manager who was present that night. Dawn was supposed to wait quietly backstage like any other guest. Johnny breaking format like that, stopping his monologue completely, was unprecedented. Rickles emerged, feigning innocence, but clearly delighted at having disrupted the show's careful routine. Carson, rather than being annoyed, seemed to enjoy the spontaneous chaos, bringing Rickles to the guest chair a full segment earlier than scheduled to this show. They're finished. They're the things I want to get. Stop trying to be graceful. They asked you to get out, and you're walking away. Johnny loved Dawn because he was genuinely unpredictable, explained a producer who worked with both men. In a show that necessarily ran on routine and structure, Rickles represented the possibility that anything could happen at any moment. Johnny found that energizing rather than threatening. What made the moment particularly special was how it revealed Carson's willingness to abandon his own carefully established format when something more interesting presented itself. Rather than sticking to the script, he recognized that the unexpected interaction would be more entertaining than whatever jokes remained in his monologue. That was Johnny at his best. The producer continued. He understood that sometimes the best television comes from breaking the rules rather than following them. Not many hosts would have the confidence to throw away prepared material, because something better happened spontaneously. The incident became one of many legendary Carson-Rickles interactions, showcasing the genuine friendship between two entertainment giants who brought out the best in each other precisely, because neither one was entirely predictable when they shared a stage. The attitude entirely changes in the whole situation. The whole thing is kind of done the right length, you know? No, you're right. You think about it a while. 15. Sammy Davis Jr.'s rapid-fire impression blitz. Sammy Davis Jr. was one of the most multi-talented entertainers in show business history. A singer, dancer, actor, and comedian whose versatility made him a frequent and welcome guest on The Tonight Show throughout Carson's tenure. During one particularly memorable appearance in the 1970s, a casual conversation about fellow entertainers suddenly transformed into an extraordinary display of Davis's mimicry skills when he launched into a series of rapid-fire impressions that left Carson and the audience in awe. In less than a minute, Davis seamlessly morphed into Frank Sinatra, Jerry Lewis, and Jimmy Stewart, capturing not just their voices, but their distinctive physical mannerisms with uncanny accuracy. Sure, all of my life I've been pushed around. Nobody ever gave me a break. Nobody cared about me. I was a poor kid in the gutter, and I'll probably die. Johnny was literally clutching his stomach, laughing, recalled a camera operator who was working that night. Not the polite laugh he'd give to less impressive bits, but genuine helpless laughter. He was as entertained as the audience was. What made the moment special was its spontaneity. Unlike prepared segments where guests would come with rehearsed material, this impression sequence emerged organically from the conversation. showcasing Davis's remarkable ability to access his vast repertoire of voices and mannerisms instantaneously. Sammy didn't need preparation. He lived and breathed these characters, explained a producer who worked on several of Davis's appearances. He'd spent decades studying these people up close, performing with them, hanging out with them. What looked like an amazing trick to the audience was second nature to him. Carson's reaction revealed his genuine appreciation for Davis's talents. As a former performer himself, Carson understood exactly how difficult it was to capture another performer's essence so perfectly and to switch between completely different personalities with no transition time. Johnny once told me that Sammy was the most complete entertainer he'd ever met, revealed a writer who worked closely with Carson. He said, "If you could only watch one person perform for the rest of your life, Sammy would be the smart choice because he could effectively become dozens of different entertainers." The impression blitz has since become one of the most frequently cited examples of Davis's extraordinary versatility, a brief but dazzling demonstration of why he was considered one of the greatest all-around entertainers in show business history. On October 26, would you welcome Arnold Schwarzenegger? Applause 16. Arnold Schwarzenegger speaks only in German. By the mid-1980s, Arnold Schwarzenegger had successfully transitioned from bodybuilding champion to Hollywood action star, appearing on The Tonight Show to promote his latest film. While these promotional appearances typically followed a predictable format, Schwarzenegger decided to inject some unexpected humor into the proceedings. When Carson asked his first question, Schwarzenegger responded with a lengthy answer entirely in German, his native language, but one that neither Carson nor most of the audience could understand. As Schwarzenegger continued speaking earnestly in German, Carson's confusion appeared genuine. Johnny had no idea this was coming, confirmed a producer who was present that night. He looked at us in the control room like, "What is happening right now?" But instead of getting flustered, he leaned into the absurdity of the moment. Carson, never one to miss an opportunity for comedy, began responding as if he understood perfectly, nodding thoughtfully and occasionally interjecting with nonsensical German-sounding words of his own. The audience, catching on to the gag, began laughing at the absurd exchange. After several minutes of this linguistic charade, Schwarzenegger finally broke character, laughed, and switched to English, explaining that he had always wanted to see how Carson would handle such a situation. What made it great was Johnny's willingness to play along rather than shut it down, noted a director who worked on the show. Some hosts would have been annoyed at being made to look foolish, but Johnny recognized the comedy potential immediately and became a full partner in the bit. The segment revealed both Schwarzenegger's underappreciated comedic instincts and Carson's remarkable ability to find humor in potentially awkward situations. Rather than asserting control as a host, Carson temporarily surrendered it, allowing himself to become part of Schwarzenegger's prank. Johnny always said the best moments on the show were the ones no one could plan, recalled a longtime friend of Carson's. This was exactly that kind of moment, something that could only happen because the guest decided to go off script, and Johnny was confident enough to follow wherever it led.